dare I say, for Greece as a whole, judging from how warmly the Greek public received the Rafale back in September during the Athens Flying Week here at Ankara Air Base.
Once upon a time, Greece was Europe's weak man, a country drowning in debt, mocked in headlines, begging Brussels for bailouts. But look at Greece now. The same nation that once couldn't balance its books is now balancing missiles on the decks of warships, stealth jets in its skies, and billions in military contracts signed with the stroke of a pen. And this is revenge. For decades, Athens lived under the shadow of Turkey. Airspace violations, saber rattling, and the constant threat of a fight breaking out over disputed islands. Greece just got used to playing defense, but something snapped. Call it pride, call it survival, call it fury. But in the last few years, Greece has turned into one of the most aggressively armed states in the entire Mediterranean. Billions have been poured into weapons that make headlines across the world. French Rafale jets bought in a deal so fast it shocked Europe. American F-35 stealth fighters locked in for delivery. Frigates armed to the teeth. New drones, upgraded tanks, and a military posture that says, not only will we defend ourselves, we will dominate our enemies if they dare to test us, and the timing couldn't be more dramatic. War is raging in Ukraine. NATO is on edge. The Middle East is always seconds away from explosion. And in the middle of it all, Greece has decided that being vulnerable is no longer an option. This is not the Greece of financial collapse. This is Greece armed with the kind of firepower that can change the balance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean. But is this new arsenal a shield or a spark? Because arms races don't end in stockpiles. They end in clashes. So how did Greece, of all nations, pull off this transformation? And what does it mean for its future, for NATO, and for the fragile peace in one of the most contested regions on Earth? That's the story of the billion-dollar arms race that changed Greece forever. And it begins with one deal, the Rafales. But why did Athens rush headfirst into French hands, and what message did those jets send to Ankara? In 2021, Greece shocked the defense world with a move no one saw coming. While most countries take years, sometimes decades, to negotiate a jet fighter deal, Athens went shopping in Paris and walked out with a contract worth 2.5 billion euros. The order was for 18 Dassault Rafales, 6 brand new units straight from the factory line, and 12 pulled directly from the French Air Force's own arsenal. So here, one thing is crystal clear. Greece wasn't planning for tomorrow. It was preparing for conflict today. The Rafale itself is no ordinary jet. Sleek, twin-engined, capable of everything from dogfights to deep strike missions, it represents one of the most advanced 4.5 generation fighters in the world. And yes, Greece wasn't buying empty shells. These birds came loaded with cutting-edge munitions, most notably the Meteor missile, a beyond visual range weapon capable of hitting targets more than 100 kilometers away. For Turkey's F-16s, which had long dominated the Aegean with sheer numbers, this was a nightmare. Suddenly, Greek pilots could engage them before they even knew they were being tracked. But the Rafale deal wasn't just about hardware, it was about prestige. For the first time in decades, Greece wasn't the one catching up. It was the one setting the pace. Athens became the first European nation to acquire Rafales, leapfrogging neighbors who had far deeper pockets but far less urgency. And this was a statement to Europe, to NATO, and most importantly, to Ankara. We are no longer playing defense. And then infrastructure upgrades followed. Tanagra Air Base, once a relic of the Cold War, was transformed into a modern hub for the Rafale fleet. Greek pilots trained directly in France, learning the jet's complex systems, while maintenance crews were overhauled to handle its advanced electronics. In 2025, the final deliveries were completed, and the 332nd Squadron of the Hellenic Air Force was combat ready. For Turkey, the message could not have been louder. The constant buzzing of Turkish jets into Greek airspace, once met with clunky interceptions, would now be answered with Meteor-equipped Rafales that could shoot first and ask questions later. But perhaps the most dangerous part of the Rafales deal wasn't the jets themselves. It was the speed with which Greece was moving. If this was just the opening act, then what came next would be even more destabilizing, because Athens wasn't stopping with French warplanes. It had its eyes on something even deadlier, something that could tilt the balance of power beyond repair: stealth fighters. And those stealth fighters carried a name that Ankara feared most: the American F-35. If the Rafales deal shocked Ankara, the F-35 announcement terrified it. Because Rafales might dominate the skies, but F-35s would disappear into them. If you're enjoying this deep dive, please like the video and consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us bring more global insights. Now, back to the video. By 2028, Greece is set to receive 20 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters from the United States, instantly catapulting its air force into the elite club of 5th-generation operators. Their radar signature is so small that enemy systems often mistake them for a bird. They don't just fight, they coordinate battles, feeding live data to ships, ground forces, and other aircraft, making the rest of the Greek military deadlier simply by being in the air. Ankara was once a partner in the very same F-35 program, slated to field over 100 of them. But that dream collapsed in 2019 when Turkey bought Russian S-400 missile systems, forcing Washington to eject them from the program. And the result? Greece now moves forward with stealth jets while Turkey is left upgrading older F-16 and scrambling for alternatives. The F-35's weapons loadout, JDAM smart bombs, AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles, and eventually even hypersonic strike options gives Greece capabilities that fundamentally alter the regional balance. Turkish air defenses, built around Russian tech, were designed to stop conventional fighters. Against the F-35, they're nearly useless. Politically, the deal represents something even bigger. Washington's full embrace of Athens as its preferred partner in the Eastern Mediterranean. Once Turkey was America's indispensable ally. And now? The Pentagon is investing billions into bases in Greece, using Alexandroupoli as a critical hub for NATO logistics into Eastern Europe. The F-35s are just the clearest symbol of that shift, but here's where the story turns. For Greece, air dominance alone isn't enough. Jets may rule the skies, but they can't protect every island, every base, every harbor. What Greece needed wasn't just swords, it needed a shield. And so Athens turned to mythology for inspiration. It called the project Achilles Shield, a multi-billion euro, AI-driven, 5-layered air defense system that promised to make Greece untouchable. Because while the Rafales and F-35s were built to strike first, Achilles Shield was designed to survive the storm that would follow. The Achilles Shield program is the crown jewel of Greece's defense revolution. And it's not just about shooting down planes. This is a fortress network capable of stopping drones, missiles, warships, submarines, even swarms of UAVs. Imagine Turkish drones swarm across the Aegean. Ballistic missiles streak through the skies. Warships lurk offshore. And yet, Greek command centers see everything, tracking, locking, and intercepting in real time. That's the promise of Achilles Shield. The heart of the system lies in its AI-powered integration. Radar, sensors, and satellites feed into command hubs that coordinate not just one response, but many. A missile can be tracked, jammed, and destroyed, sometimes by multiple platforms at once. Drones can be blinded by electronic warfare before ever crossing Greek airspace. Enemy ships can find themselves locked in the sights of anti-ship batteries before they even launch. But Athens isn't building this system alone. Talks are in advanced stages with Israel Aerospace Industries to bring in Barak medium-range air defense batteries. It's battle-tested, fast to deliver, and easily deployed on Greece's islands. But why? Because time matters. European and American systems move slowly. Israel delivers quickly. But Achilles Shield is more than just a tool. It's a doctrinal revolution. For decades, Greece leaned on naval supremacy to guard its islands. Now, it's moving toward networked, high-tech defense. Defense Minister Nikos Dendias wasn't exaggerating when he called the project an existential issue for the country. Because for Greece, survival doesn't come from holding territory alone. It comes from making invasion too costly, too bloody, too impossible to even attempt. Still, there's one thing here. Achilles' Shield was legendary, but even it had one weakness: the heel. The question now is whether this modern shield can truly cover everything, or whether cracks will appear under the stress of real war. And that leads us to the next frontier, because Greece knows that while a shield can save you, a shield alone doesn't win wars. To dominate the Aegean, to keep the Turkish navy bottled up, to project power across the Mediterranean, Greece needed more than defense. And that's where the Hellenic navy steps in, with billions in new warships and a fleet designed not just to patrol, but to strike. For decades, control of those waters, scattered with islands, riddled with disputed boundaries, pulsing with shipping lanes, has determined who holds the advantage. And for too long, Greece's fleet lagged behind its ambitions, and that era is over. Athens has committed 3 billion euros to new Belharra-class frigates from France, again cutting-edge warships bristling with air defense missiles, anti-submarine systems, and long-range strike capabilities. These aren't just ships, they're floating fortresses designed to dominate the eastern Mediterranean, so 3 are already on order. Each one comes packed with Aster 30 anti-air missiles, capable of intercepting enemy aircraft and even ballistic threats, plus Exocet anti-ship missiles to keep rival fleets at bay. With advanced sonar and stealth features, these frigates are nightmares for submarines lurking under the surface. The entire Hellenic Navy is slated for modernization by 2032 through a mix of acquisitions and upgrades. Older vessels will be refitted with new combat systems, ensuring that Greece doesn't just have modern warships, but a fully networked fleet integrated with its Achilles Shield and Air Force. So why does this matter? Because naval dominance is the one thing that can keep Turkey's much larger coastline in check. While Turkey has been pouring resources into its indigenous warship programs, including the TCG Anadolu amphibious assault ship, Greece's bet is on fewer, more advanced platforms that can kill at distance and survive under pressure. For decades, Greek sailors have patrolled the Aegean as guardians. Now, they'll do so with the teeth to strike first if necessary. Still, a navy, even one armed with Belharra, is only part of the equation. Greece is an island-heavy nation, with dozens of garrisons spread across vulnerable territories close to Turkish shores. War at sea or in the air is useless if the land defenses can't hold. And so, Athens has opened its checkbook again, this time for its army. Billions are being poured into upgrading tanks, armored vehicles, and ground-based air defenses. Because at the end of the day, control of the islands doesn't come from frigates or jets. It comes from boots on the ground and armor ready to move. So the seas are getting sharper. But what about the land? What happens when the fight moves from open waters to narrow islands, from frigate missiles to tank cannons? That's where the next chapter begins. For all the headlines about fighter jets and billion-dollar frigates, war is still won, or lost, on the ground, and Greece knows it. If the Aegean Islands are the pressure points in its rivalry with Turkey, then the Hellenic army is the force that makes sure no landing party, no mechanized incursion, ever succeeds. And the problem is that much of Greece's land arsenal looked like a museum piece. Tanks dating back to the Cold War, armored personnel carriers that had rolled off assembly lines before many of today's soldiers were even born. Against Turkey's expanding and modernized army, that simply wasn't good enough. So Athens pulled the trigger on another wave of spending, this time for modern armor and mechanized units. And the centerpiece? Upgrades to its fleet of Leopard 2 tanks. These German-built beasts are being refitted with new fire control systems, improved armor, and battlefield networking capabilities. In an age where a tank without digital integration is a sitting duck, these upgrades ensure the Leopards stay lethal, but armor alone doesn't secure an island chain. That requires mobility. Fast, armored vehicles capable of transporting troops, launching counterattacks, and holding ground. Enter the modernization of Greece's armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles. Older M113s are slowly giving way to more advanced systems, some sourced from allies, others developed in cooperation with domestic industry. And then there's artillery. In modern warfare, artillery isn't just about big guns, it's about precision fires. Greece has been upgrading its howitzers and considering long-range rocket artillery options to match the range and punch of Turkey's T-300 Kasırga systems. The goal is to ensure that no enemy force can gather or move without being within Greek firing range. Layered into this are short-range and medium-range ground-based air defenses designed to complement the high-tech Patriot batteries already in service. This means that Greek soldiers on the front line aren't left exposed to drone swarms or low-flying aircraft, two of Turkey's strongest tactical advantages. But there's something else happening here. A clear shift in doctrine. For decades, the Greek army's role was mostly defensive. Hold the line, protect the islands, and wait for NATO diplomacy to calm things down. Now, the modernization program suggests something more ambitious: deterrence by strength. An army that can not only defend but counterattack hard enough to make Ankara think twice before ever testing the waters. This land transformation doesn't come cheap. Every upgraded tank, every advanced APC, every smart artillery round costs money. Money that critics argue could be spent on schools, infrastructure, or healthcare. Yet Athens insists this is survival, not luxury. And that leads to the next critical question. How can Greece afford this billion-dollar arms race without breaking its own economy? And is there a way to turn this spending spree into an advantage for the Greek industry itself? A billion-dollar jet here, a multi-billion-dollar frigate there. Stack them all together and you have a defense budget that looks more like a war chest. In 2024, Greece spent over 3% of its GDP on defense, one of the highest rates in NATO, outpacing even many larger economies. For a country that not so long ago was drowning in debt and begging Brussels for bailouts, this level of spending looks, at first glance, insane. But Athens insists this is the price of survival. To understand the gamble, you have to rewind to the Greek debt crisis of the 2010s. Back then, austerity gutted everything: pensions, salaries, healthcare, even military readiness. Tanks sat idle. Jets were grounded. Ships couldn't leave port for lack of fuel. The army was starved while the economy crumbled. Fast forward a decade, and the political elite are determined never to be caught that vulnerable again. Defense spending has ballooned to nearly 8 billion euros annually. And while critics warn that such military addiction risks pulling Greece back into financial instability, Athens is playing a different game, channeling that money into its own defense industry. Because here's the thing, this arms race isn't just about importing shiny toys from Paris, Berlin, or Washington. Greece is also investing in domestic production and partnerships. The modernization of APCs, drones, and even some naval systems is increasingly tied to Greek manufacturers. The government's message is clear: if we're going to spend billions, we might as well build part of it ourselves. Companies like HAI are seeing a revival, securing contracts for maintenance, upgrades, and co-production. Greek shipyards, once left to rot, are being pulled back into relevance through naval modernization programs. The government even talks about turning Greece into a regional defense hub, exporting tech and services to allies in the Balkans and Eastern Mediterranean. Of course, the skeptics are loud. They argue that Greece's economy is still fragile, and pouring billions into weapons risks starving other priorities. Public services, infrastructure, education, all feel the squeeze when the army eats first. The memory of austerity still burns fresh for many citizens. Can a country that struggled to pay pensions really afford stealth jets and missile shields? Athens counters with a brutal truth. What good are schools, hospitals, or pensions if the country itself is vulnerable to military humiliation? National survival, they argue, is the ultimate prerequisite for prosperity. Still, Greece is betting not only on deterrence through strength, but also on economic payoff through defense industrial revival. If it works, the arms race could transform Greece into a modern military power with a stronger economy to match. If it fails, the debt nightmare could return. Only this time armed with billion-dollar war machines that can't pay the bills. So even if Greece manages to sustain this buildup, how will its neighbors react? Will this deter conflict or provoke it? When Greece announced its 25 billion euro military overhaul, the ripple effects were immediate. Because let's be honest, this arms race isn't happening in a vacuum. Every euro Athens spends on Rafales, F-35s, or missile shields is really a message to one country above all: Turkey. From the fall of Constantinople to the War of Independence, from Cyprus in 1974 to constant dogfights over the Aegean, the two neighbors have been locked in a cold, hot standoff for generations, and with both sitting inside NATO's tent, the alliance has had to tolerate this family feud for decades. But here's the thing. While Turkey boasts a population of 85 million and one of NATO's largest armies, Greece is determined not to be the junior partner. And that determination is exactly why Athens is arming itself to the teeth. The new Achilles Shield system with its anti-drone, anti-missile, and AI-powered radar layers looks tailor-made to counter Turkey's rapidly growing drone fleet. Remember, it was Turkish Bayraktar TB2 drones that rewrote the rules of war in Libya, Syria, and especially in Nagorno-Karabakh. So Greece saw that playbook and decided, never again will we be caught flat-footed. And then there's the Air Force. While Turkey is still waiting on upgrades to its F-16 fleet after being kicked out of the F-35 program, Greece is leapfrogging ahead with Rafales already operational and F-35s scheduled for delivery before the decade's end. And its goal? Air superiority so overwhelming that any Turkish attempt to dominate the skies over the Aegean is neutralized before it begins. The naval dimension is no less important. The Aegean Sea looks peaceful to tourists snapping photos in Santorini. But to military planners, it's a chessboard crowded with contested islands, choke points, and overlapping air defense bubbles. Greece's new Belharra-class frigates and modernized submarines are a direct challenge to Ankara's ambition of turning the eastern Mediterranean into a Turkish lake. And let's not forget Cyprus. Every Greek defense analyst knows that any flare-up could begin there, where Turkish troops still occupy the northern part of the island. By strengthening its forces across all domains, land, sea, and air, Athens is preparing to respond quickly and decisively to any provocation. By strengthening its forces across all domains, land, sea, and air, Athens is preparing to respond quickly and decisively to any provocation. But Turkey isn't standing still either. Its indigenous defense industry is booming, churning out drones, tanks, and even plans for a fifth-generation fighter jet. Beyond Turkey, the shockwaves extend to the Balkans and Eastern Mediterranean. Countries like Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and even Israel are watching closely. A heavily armed Greece changes the balance of power in the region, making it not just a frontline NATO state, but a regional heavyweight. The transformation has already made Athens indispensable to NATO planning. Still, what happens when this local arms race collides with global rivalries? Because Greece isn't just rearming for Turkey, it's rearming in a world where the US, Russia, and China are also redrawing the military map. And that's exactly where we head next. The global stakes of Greece's billion-dollar gamble. Greece's military transformation isn't just a neighborhood story, it's a global one. Because when a small Mediterranean nation decides to drop 25 billion euros on its armed forces, it's not simply about outmatching a rival like Turkey. It's about carving out a place in the New World Order, where power is no longer guaranteed by size alone, but by technology, alliances, and strategic geography. Let's start with NATO. For years, the alliance has struggled with the uncomfortable truth. Most members don't meet the famous 2% GDP defense spending target. Greece, by choice, has blown past it, spending over 3% of GDP and doing so consistently. That puts Athens not just in compliance, but in a league with only the most committed allies, the US, Poland, and a handful of Baltic states. In an alliance where Washington constantly complains about freeloaders, Greece has turned itself into a model ally, and that buys political capital. And then there's geography. Greece sits at the literal crossroads of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. In an era when NATO is stretched thin between Russian aggression in the east, instability in the south, and rising tensions with China globally, Greece is in prime position to be a logistical hub. The port of Alexandroupoli has already become a favorite staging ground for US and NATO operations, bypassing bottlenecks like the Turkish Straits. That makes Athens indispensable, not just to Brussels, but to Washington. Now let's widen the lens. Greece's spending spree is unfolding in a world where Russia's war in Ukraine has remilitarized Europe, where China's rise is forcing the West to rethink security in the Indo-Pacific, and where the Middle East remains a cauldron of instability. In that environment, a heavily armed Greece isn't just securing its islands, it's bolstering the Western camp in a new age of great power competition. Moscow certainly sees it that way. For Russia, Greece's alignment with NATO and the US represents another closing door in the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, Beijing is watching with interest too, given its investments in Greek infrastructure like the Piraeus port. A militarily assertive Athens could complicate China's quiet push into Europe through economic influence. And then there's Israel. Its defense ties with Greece have never been stronger, especially through projects like the Achilles Shield and drone cooperation. As Ankara and Tel Aviv navigate their rocky relationship, Greece positions itself as Israel's natural partner in the Eastern Mediterranean. But here's the million-dollar, or rather, the billion-dollar question. Is this a sustainable bet? Because while Greece has positioned itself as a rising star in NATO and a serious player in its region, military buildups come with a catch. They provoke countermoves, they create expectations, they demand constant spending, and they risk tying a nation's economy to an arms race it might not be able to escape. So, as Greece marches forward into this high-tech future, the stakes aren't just about jets, ships, or missile shields. They're about whether this transformation will secure the nation for generations, or drag it into the very cycle of instability it's trying to avoid. Has Greece truly built a shield for its future, or a sword that ensures it will always need to keep fighting? Greece has done what few thought possible. A nation once drowning in debt and mocked as Europe's financial weak link has transformed itself into one of NATO's most aggressive spenders, pumping billions into weapons, technology, and alliances. From Rafale jets roaring over the Aegean, to Belharra frigates patrolling the Mediterranean, to the futuristic Achilles Shield poised to rewrite its defense doctrine, Greece is no longer a passive player. It is, quite deliberately, building itself into a fortress. But fortresses come with a price. This transformation is the most ambitious in Greece's modern history. A 25 billion euro gamble on the idea that strength buys survival. For Athens, the calculation is simple. Without overwhelming military capability, the country remains exposed to Turkish pressure, regional instability, and global uncertainty. Better to bleed euros now than risk bleeding sovereignty later. And yet, the danger of overreach lurks. Economists warn that pouring billions into defense risks reopening the wounds of the debt crisis. Critics argue that schools, hospitals, and infrastructure could suffer while the military thrives. Empires don't always collapse from invasion. Sometimes they collapse under the weight of their own spending. Greece's leaders believe they've balanced the scales by tying this buildup to domestic industry and innovation. Whether that bet pays off remains to be seen. Regionally, the consequences are already being felt. The arms race with Turkey is alive, fueled by drones, jets, and frigates on both sides. Each move Athens makes provokes a countermove from Ankara. Neither wants war, but both prepare for it every single day. The Aegean sky is crowded, the Mediterranean waters tense, and Cyprus remains a frozen fault line. The build-up, for now, is deterrence. But deterrence can slip into escalation faster than anyone dares admit. Globally, Greece's rise has repositioned it as a critical NATO asset. No longer just a sun-drenched tourist haven, it's now a military hub at the intersection of East and West, North and South. The US and France see it as a reliable partner. Israel sees it as a natural ally. Russia sees it as a threat. China sees it as a complication. And NATO sees it as proof that smaller states can still punch far above their weight. So, what has Greece really built? A shield to protect its sovereignty, or a sword that ensures it must always remain on guard, always sharpening, always spending? That is the paradox of power. Greece has bought itself security, yes, but it has also bought itself into a permanent arms race, and once you step onto that treadmill, it is nearly impossible to step off. The Mediterranean has always been a stage for empires, and history has no room for nations that cannot defend themselves. By arming itself to the teeth, Greece is making sure that when the next chapter of history is written, it will not be written without Athens. The billion-dollar arms race has transformed Greece's army. The question now is whether it has also transformed its future, for better or for worse. If you found this analysis valuable, please consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into geopolitics. We would love to hear your thoughts. Drop your comments below and let us know what you think. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.